I'm Natasha, and thanks for joining us on Middle East Now. It looks like Israel and Hezbollah may be closer to a ceasefire deal than ever before. U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein says that there's a real opportunity to end the fighting after meeting Lebanon's Speaker of Parliament, Nabih Berri, in Beirut. Well, following that meeting, Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem postponed his expected speech. But as the talks continue, the Iranian-backed terror group has continued to further intensify its rocket launches into central Israel as IDF troops deepen their ground operation in southern Lebanon. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
It's the aim of deal or no deal. Deal or no deal.
U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein arrived in Beirut on Tuesday after Hezbollah responded positively to the American ceasefire proposal, apart from minor wording changes. Following his meeting with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabih Berri, designated by Hezbollah to represent them in the talks on the American proposal, Hochstein said the sides continued to significantly narrow the gaps.
I came back because we have a real opportunity to bring this conflict to an end. This is a moment of decision-making. It is now within our grasp. So as the window is now, I hope the coming days yield a resolute decision.
While the main point of contention remains Israel's demand to operate freely in light of any violation, the deal reportedly refers to all of Lebanon, not just its southern part. In addition to the removal of Hezbollah forces and the deployment of the Lebanese army in the south, the deal would also see security arrangements in Beirut, the seaport and international port, to prevent any weapons from reaching Hezbollah via Syria.
We are currently talking about negotiations for a ceasefire and possible arrangements that the Americans are leading. I say it's only done under fire, and it's done with a lot of fire. We demand the removal of Hezbollah beyond the Litani River, as well as other issues that I will not disclose here. But the important thing is not the document itself. Even if there is a ceasefire, no one can promise that it will hold.
Despite the diplomatic optimism, the sides continue to escalate reciprocal blows. Throughout Tuesday, Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets and drones at northern and central Israel, where sirens have become a daily occurrence. 5 people were lightly hurt in the attacks after Monday night saw a deadly missile strike on Shfaram, killing 1 woman and injuring dozens, including 18 children. In Lebanon, the IDF continued to strike Hezbollah targets in southern Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and southern Lebanon, from the air and on the ground. In one of the villages, IDF troops uncovered a weapons depot in a schoolyard, further proof of Hezbollah's cynical use of civilian infrastructure to cover its terror activities. And so, each side is expected to seek maximizing achievements in the field as the diplomatic efforts push forward.
We don't have agreement. If we did, we'd be out announcing it and trumpeting it from the rooftops. But we believe that we're seeing progress, and we think both sides, both the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, have indicated a willingness to get this done and to get it done on a short time frame.
All right, joining us now in the studio is military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin. All right, so I think, the main question that everybody has right now is how likely is this deal that's on the table to actually go through? And has Hezbollah really been weakened enough at this point, in Israel's opinion?
So it seems that the chances are reasonably strong enough for Amos Hochstein to travel to the region, for the Lebanese government, including the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, to indicate that there are positive, let's call it impressions, from the arrangement that's being drawn up. I think, from a military perspective and a security perspective, Hezbollah has an interest in saying yes to this because they are absorbing serious damage every single day, losing operatives, losing infrastructure. The ground maneuver is widening. So essentially, Israel is ensuring that these negotiations are occurring under fire. Now, of course, Hezbollah is also firing what it can, but this is much less than they had hoped to be able to fire at this stage in the war. So the war is not going in Hezbollah's direction. It's losing this war. When you compare capability to capability, they're definitely on the losing side. And so I think they're interested in stopping the hemorrhaging, stopping the bleeding. And the real test will come when Israel has to enforce this arrangement, because it will be Israel that has to enforce it. There is nobody else that can do it. And Israel is demanding U.S. recognition and legitimacy. This is part of the Israeli-American arrangement for Israel to be able to go in, whether it's from the air, whether it's from the ground, and to enforce violations of this agreement and violations of UN Security Council Resolution 1701 in the future, when Hezbollah will undoubtedly start trying to crawl back to southern Lebanon, start trying to rebuild its invasion bases on the Israeli border, and when it tries to replenish its rocket arsenal. When that happens, that's when the real test will come, if this arrangement is reached. And Israel appears to be very firm in its new position, which is that this is not going to be a repeat of 2006 and the years that followed. It's not going to be a repeat of 2000, when Israel withdrew and just didn't go back no matter what Hezbollah did. Now the reality is different, and Israel is very keen on preserving its achievements. So I think under those conditions, Israel will agree, and Hezbollah will hope that things will not go in that direction.
All right. Well, joining us now on Zoom is foreign policy expert Dr. Walid Fares. I'm interested to kind of get your perspective and that of the Lebanese public as well here. Now, first of all, you heard what Yaakov was saying here. Even if the ceasefire deal is agreed upon, can the world really expect Hezbollah to have no armed presence in that area between the Lebanese-Israeli border and the Litani River? They never abided by past resolutions, as we clearly know.
Absolutely. What the expert has said, and yourself right now, is that history is not a good example of the implementation of Hezbollah, of its own signature, though those who will sign will be the Speaker of the Parliament or President of the Council of Ministers. But we'll come back to that in a second. Basically, in 2000, there was such an agreement. Hezbollah came back, crawled back, as you say. In 1996, before that, same situation. And obviously now, before the October 7, after October 7. So what we know is that Hezbollah, with or without their leadership, because Tehran leads them at this point in time, will use any moment to rearm, to retrain. Yes, they know there is a price to pay, but that's how jihadist organizations do. Al-Qaeda was terminated, you had ISIS is terminated, you have the Neo-Taliban. It's almost the same thing. But realities are that this project of a ceasefire is a last-minute one by the Biden administration. So there are a few questions I'm posing. Number one, will the Trump administration have the same approach to this agreement? It depends on their approach with regard to Iran. Second, there is something about defining who is guaranteeing this on the Lebanon side.
Right.
And when news agencies talk about Lebanon, I put it under quote, because 70% of the Lebanese are against Hezbollah. They want to see a change of deployment inside Lebanon. They want to see the Lebanese army. And 30% who are basically the supporters of Hezbollah, but overly armed, are the ones who are going to be signing. And that would be questionable.
Mm-hmm. So moving on to that, who is actually going to be able to enforce the terms of this ceasefire down the line, in your opinion? Does the Lebanese army have the ability and power to do this without international support?
Even with international support, this army is under this government, and the government gives the orders, not the army by itself. And therefore, I know it's a very big piece to swallow, without a change of policy in Beirut, without another government coming under United Nations Security Council Resolution 1559, I mean, it's really up to the Lebanese opposition to act and to tell the United States, not necessarily Israel, to tell the United States, to tell the Arab world, we're not happy. They should say, we're not happy with Hezbollah. And if this deal satisfies Israel or satisfies this administration, we as Lebanese, would they say 70%, we're not happy, because Hezbollah will withdraw to the Litani and then does what? They go and persecute and crush the other Lebanese and use the rest of Lebanon. So at the next war, those missiles won't be in the south. They'll be on the line of summits across Mount Lebanon. And that is worse than the situation right now.
Right. Now, we're going to turn to our correspondent. Oh, we're not turning to our correspondent yet. Unfortunately, we don't have her yet. But I do want to ask you, I mean, you spoke a little bit about the Lebanese public and what they want to see happen right now. Obviously, we understand from polls that about 70% of the Lebanese public is not in support of Hezbollah. But what do they actually want to see happen next? Because we do know that there is mass support for attacking Israel, per se, out of anger, just general Arab anger over what is happening in the Gaza Strip.
there is a general Arab anger, which is out of Al Jazeera, and there is the Arab position out of Al Arabiya. Just giving an example that even in the Arab world, not everybody is in love with Hezbollah. Actually, Hezbollah is fighting to bring down governments and replace them with pro-Khomeiniist governments. So this attitude of saying the Arab world is, I don't think it works here, because in the Arab world also, the same parameter applies. 70%, maybe more in the Arab world, because of the Sunni majority, are against the Iran regime, the Assad regime, and Hezbollah. Reality is a lot of work should be done here in Washington. I mean, the next Washington has Trump administration, not exactly a friend of Hezbollah, has a majority of Republicans or anti-Iran regime, Islamic regime in the House and in the Senate. So I think a lot of work has to be done in Beirut by the opposition. A lot of work has to be done here. But of course, we have those weeks, very sensitive weeks between now and January the 20th. And Israel is on its own trying to get the best, project, the best results from these negotiations.
All right, Walid Fares, thank you so much for joining us right now. We're going to be turning to our correspondent in northern Israel, Emmanuel Onorat. Emmanuel, what is the latest in terms of the rocket fire that we've been seeing today from Lebanon?
Right, Natasha, it's been a busy day, in fact, of ongoing rocket fire and drones also coming from South Lebanon, launched by Hezbollah to northern Israel, but not just. We saw this morning that Hezbollah also launched a barrage of rockets to central Israel. And in fact, the IDF came out and said that over 75 rockets were launched to northern Israel, and not only, but also including that attack that we saw to central Israel earlier this morning. Now, the IDF's operations is still ongoing, and they've also released statements explaining that they've also killed in a targeted raid, that they've destroyed Hezbollah depots, weapons depots, and observation posts, and rocket launching sites, which these rocket launching sites are also sites that do not just target northern Israel, but also central Israel. And in fact, Hezbollah released also a statement saying that it had also launched around 2 o'clock this afternoon, a barrage of rockets towards the 8200 intelligence unit headquarters around Tel Aviv. Now, there's been actually no confirmation of that from the Israeli side, so those are just Hezbollah reports, and it's still difficult to say whether or not those claims are actually true, Natasha.
All right, Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us with that update. I'd like to turn to our guest in studio, Yaakov. Yaakov, what do we know at this point about ongoing Israeli operations in Lebanon? What is specifically being targeted at this point? And also about, the remaining arsenal that Hezbollah has at this point. We've obviously heard statements from the Defense Ministry indicating that 80% of Hezbollah's weapons arsenal has been destroyed, but obviously we haven't seen that many long-range ballistic missiles actually fired into the state of Israel throughout the course of the last year. So the question is, what is the breakdown in terms of the weapons in that arsenal?
So look, I think there's no question that Hezbollah is firing so much less than what it had hoped to be able to fire. The estimates going into this stage of the war were that it could fire over 10,000 projectiles on Israel every single day, every 24 hours, most of them on northern Israel, and many, many hundreds on central Israel as well. And obviously, we're not seeing that. We're not seeing those numbers. So they do have the ability, they have residual firepower, and they are attempting to activate it in order to transmit the message that they can fight a long war of attrition, that they're in this war, that they're still, a relevant player. So they have some firepower left. 20% looks like an accurate estimate based on what they're able to get off the ground. And the fact that we here, in Israel, in central Israel, are able to largely maintain a routine daily life here is contrary to most of the assessments that were in place going into this war. So that shows that the intensive Israeli Air Force airstrikes at the beginning of this stage of the war, in late September, early October, really did decimate most of Hezbollah's firepower. And this was a wild card. This was a secret capability that nobody knew that Israel could pull off, and it pulled it off after the Beeper attacks. And so that's the air component, and it's still ongoing. After that very high-intensive series of strikes, The Israeli Air Force continues at a lower momentum to strike Hezbollah capabilities in Beirut, in Dahya, in the Bekaa Valley. It's striking missile launching bases. It's striking command and control headquarters. It's continued to pin down Hezbollah. And on the ground, we're seeing the ground offensive expand. We don't know exactly where the ground forces are operating. The IDF is not publicizing that right now for obvious reasons, but it clearly has expanded from that first line of villages that we saw several weeks ago. And this is the sort of the invasion Radwan force infrastructure. This was the basis for Hezbollah's Invade the Galilee program. This was an October 7th style attack that Hezbollah had been planning for years to invade northern Israel with thousands of well-trained terrorists, conduct mass murder, kidnapping. October 7th in the north is what they planned. Probably would have been even worse. That's largely been dismembered now and degraded. And we're seeing the ground offensive continue to expand. Basically, Hezbollah is being forced to negotiate under fire.
All right, well, we're going to be turning to Iran now. Israel says that it has destroyed part of Iran's nuclear program in the retaliatory strikes that it carried out across the country last month. The Israeli Prime Minister has confirmed this without giving any details, but a report from the Axios news site indicates that a nuclear weapons research facility making plastic explosives at the Parchin military complex was eliminated. Now, Iran has not commented on this report, but it comes as Iran's foreign ministry is slamming new sanctions by the European Union and also the United Kingdom against Tehran over its support for Russia's war on Ukraine. And joining us now is Benham Ben Talablu. He's a senior fellow for the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. So, Benham, what kind of damage has actually been inflicted on Iran's nuclear program from what we understand in these reports?
It's a pleasure to be with you. Well, there is no clear battle damage assessment from America or from Iran here, but what we know through satellite imagery, what we know about the history of Iran's past nuclear weaponization efforts, and what we know from recent news reports and indeed the most recent Israeli confirmation, we can put together that Israel was able to both detect and destroy a facility, a nuclear site known as Talagan 2, a site which was actually never inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency. Conversely, Talagan 1, a similar but not the same facility, was reportedly once inspected in 2015. And these sites, Talagan 1 and Talagan 2, were related to Iran's weaponization drive, some activities which scientists and reporters and policymakers believe continued into the present day. Many of which also were suspected to have been what Axios reported on in June and July of this year when they talked about computer modeling, explosive work, and metallurgy, all of which are basically covers for Iran creeping towards at least a weapons capability in the future. So this strike, which was part of Israel's larger retaliation against the Islamic Republic for Iran's large October 1st ballistic missile barrage, continues to prove to be more sophisticated with the passage of time, which includes news like this.
Right. Why is Israel commenting on this now, and how can we expect Iran to respond? Because obviously, you know, following the retaliatory attack, it was clear that there was some type of incentive to kind of de-escalate the situation by making it appear as though perhaps Iran hadn't been widely impacted by Israel's strikes.
Well, indeed, it was the Iranians filling the airwaves, not the Israelis, after October 26, when that retaliation happened. And in the first 12 to 24 hours, the Iranians were the ones trying to downplay the attack. But really, 24 to 48 hours and really into the present, you've had the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the supreme leader, a whole host of people in Iran talking about the need to respond. And amid that conversation about a potential Iranian retaliation to the Israeli retaliation, there have also been increased commentary throughout the month of October and November, significantly increased commentary about the regime flexing its nuclear option in the face of a conventional military defeat, a defeat that both its long-range strike capabilities and its terrorist proxies are running up hard against vis-a-vis the Israelis. So this potential rhetorical flexing on behalf of the Israelis and potentially even on behalf of the prime minister could be designed to check that.
Now, break down the new sanctions that we're seeing leveled against Iran regarding its involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine and what those implications ultimately will be for the Islamic Republic.
Well, I would bring folks' attention to both the UK and the EU broadening their sanctions due to Iran's deepening military cooperation with Russia, and specifically point to the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping company, Irisl. Both the EU and the UK have designated this entity, basically putting it in the spotlights, doing an asset freeze on this actor, because this actor is basically using the Caspian Sea, which is the world's largest lake, to ship military components across that lake to the Russians. And while it's much harder to get sanctions enforcement like the Caspian Sea basin due to the host of bad actors that exist there, this at least shows a desire that the incoming U.S. administration, in my view, can and should build on. There is already, in my view, a multilateral predicate for maximum pressure. So come January 2025, when there's a change in Washington's Iran policy, the transatlantic gap that has existed previously can be bridged based on these very good moves by the EU and the UK.
All right, Benham, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us as per usual with that breakdown. We're going to be turning now to a related story. As Israel advances its ground operations in southern Lebanon, IDF troops are finding massive troves of Russian weapons, confirming suspicions that Hezbollah has been enhancing its arsenal with the help of Russia. That is according to a new report from the Wall Street Journal, which says that some of the weapons include Russian-made modern Kornet anti-tank missiles that were manufactured as recently as 2020 and were sent to the Lebanese terror group from Syria. Now, the arms discoveries have added to concerns in Israel that Russia may be deepening its relationship with Hezbollah. This as tensions mount between the United States and Russia following U.S. President Biden's approval to allow Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range U.S. missiles. Well, joining us now is Ksenia Svetlova. She's a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. So, Ksenia, first of all, break down what kinds of weapons Israel has discovered from what we understand.
Well, as your report just said, that the first and most important part is, of course, anti-tank missiles, the Russian Kornets. And by the way, this type of weapon was already located in Hezbollah-run territory during the war of 2006. So the second Lebanese war. So this is not exactly something new. I mean, nobody in Israel should be surprised, that Israeli soldiers located this kind of weapons with Hezbollah terrorists. And the second type, which is no less important because this is something that both Ukraine and Israel are struggling with, and it's something that it seems to be it's a tool of the war of the future. It's, of course, the drones. The same drones are being used in the battlefield against Ukraine, and the same drones are being used in the battlefield against Israel. So while we know that Iran manufactures many of these drones, this is not something that we can deny that some of them actually came via the Russian supplies, not directly from the Iranians, because Russians have a much easier hand in Syria to deliver weapons, to transport them, and so on. So then again, something that we knew all along, now we have more vivid and solid proof of, and the decision makers in Israel certainly have to take these new old discoveries into account.
What does this tell us about where Russia stands when it comes to Israel?
Well, I think that it was clear also before the beginning of the war against Ukraine, but it's, of course, much more clear now, during the last year of the war here in Israel, that Russia is driven towards the anti-Western and consequently anti-Israeli bloc, the new axis of evil, if you'd like. This is, North Korea and, of course, Iran, Belarus, and Russia itself, with some more countries that seem to be engaging with it despite the sanctions and despite the war. So this is very, very clear. Israel stands, with one camp, and this is the pro-Western, pro-American, pro-European camp, along with the moderate Arab Sunni states. And the other camp, which is, of course, it's hostile towards Israel and hostile towards the whole of the West. This is the camp that Russia is part of. So we know that Russia needs badly, it needs Hezbollah in Syria, first of all, to safeguard the continuation of Assad's regime. And Hezbollah is by far the most efficient, well-armed and trained militia that fights for Bashar Assad, along with Pakistanis and Afghanis and many others. But there is no comparison between them. This is the flagship. I think it's quite clear that while Russia is interested in Hezbollah in Syria, it has to safeguard and it has to keep Hezbollah alive and in good form, also in Lebanon. So that's where they stand.
All right, Ksenia, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to be turning to our guest in studio, Yaakov, for a final question here. Biden's recent decision to allow Ukraine to essentially fire U.S. missiles into Russia, what could this mean for the way that Russia decides to move forward within the geopolitical frame of Israel's ongoing war against Iran and its proxy groups?
Well, first of all, regarding the immediate Russian decision, in response to that decision by Washington, has been to change its nuclear doctrine, which is quite alarming and something that the entire world needs to watch, because they've now, according to reports, loosened their nuclear doctrine and basically loosened the definition of what a threat that constitutes a nuclear reply now means. So that's something that can affect the entire world, and we need to watch that closely. Second of all, look, I think that Russia views Israel as an American outpost in the Middle East, and essentially it has closely allied itself with Iran. It's obvious that Iran is one of the main firepower suppliers of Russia. It's not now Russia that's arming the Middle East. It's the Middle East, specifically Iran, that has been arming Russia. And the same drones that have been flying into Kiev, the same kinds of drones, have also been flown and basically launched at Israeli cities as well. They come from the same production lines and they constitute the same threat. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of the larger framework. In terms of these weapons, we don't know if it's the Syrian army that supplied it to Hezbollah or Russia directly. That's an intelligence investigation. We need to wait for more information before that becomes clear.
All right, Yaakov, we are going to be back shortly after this break. We have a lot more coming up, so don't go anywhere. I'm Natasha Kirchek, and this is Middle East.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
And we are back on Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for sticking with us. Well, a new UN report claims that 70% of those killed in the war in Gaza have been women and children. This report, which heavily criticizes Israel, has made headlines around the world. But with less than 20% of the total number of fatalities in Gaza actually verified, many analysts are questioning not just the methodology and conclusions in the report, but also the intent. Our senior correspondent Bianca Zanini breaks it down.
Images of bodies in bloody blankets after another Israeli attack in Gaza. Young Israeli soldiers forced into a terrible but necessary war, killed in combat. Heartbreaking reports of civilian suffering and death. The stories from the ground in Gaza are tough, but they're also drowning in misinformation, falsehoods, and different narratives. The international community listens to the United Nations. This Friday, the UN issued a report saying nearly 70% of those killed in Gaza were women and children. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza reports that around 44,000 people have been killed since the beginning of the war. Not distinguishing between fighters and civilians, they claim most are women and children. But less than 20% of the total number of deaths in the war has been independently verified so far. By September 2024, the UN Human Rights Council had been able to confirm 8,119 deaths.
As of now, we have about 10,000 fatalities that we have verified, including 4,700 children, that's about 45%, and 2,461 women, that's about 25%. So the overall 70% women and children remains for now.
When they say children, it's everyone under 18, and we know that there's a clear trend for Hamas using child fighters. And if we look at the breakdown of the 43,344 that Hamas are claiming, we can see clear demographic spikes in males between the ages of about 15 and 50, which to me suggests that the IDF are targeting males, which suggests they're targeting fighters.
Gaza's authorities are almost entirely run by Hamas, and the ongoing war makes the independent identification process difficult, causing many statisticians and analysts to question the accuracy of the numbers presented in the report.
The next thing we need to look at is the methodology the UN have used for this report. They've only looked at 8,119 names. And they've said they're verified, which is also very tricky because any verification that takes place in Gaza is clearly going to be tainted by Hamas. They still run a significant part of the Gaza Strip in spite of the IDF's best efforts.
The UN stands by the numbers.
The MOH figures compared with ours in the last escalation, several escalations have matched and they've come very close. So we do not have reasons to believe that this time it's very different. The numbers are, of course, massive compared to previous years, so we do need time to catch up and verify.
The UN based the verification on having 3 independent sources or witnesses to a death, typically neighbors or family members. Almost 90% of their verified fatalities were from large incidents, where at least 5 people were killed.
And what that specifically excludes is any events where casualties were incurred with no witnesses, i.e. people who were in combat with the IDF at the time of dying. So it's a heavily skewed report. And as I said, totally at odds even with Hamas's own numbers.
According to Andrew Fox, the report speaks to a larger issue, the anti-Israel narrative that permeates the UN.
Hamas seem to have been completely deleted from the conversation. It's as if there's a war happening in Gaza just because, and there was nothing behind it, and there's nobody being fought, and it's just Israel going in and blowing huge chunks of Rafah or Khan Yunis or Gaza City off the map for reasons that are kind of unspecified. And it's a very strange narrative. So when they say verified and then they drop 70% in there, it's such a clearly anti-Israel bias.
Israel claims around 18,000 Hamas members have been killed in the war and says approximately 1 civilian has been killed for every fighter, a number it blames on Hamas, showing repeatedly that Hamas hides in hospitals, schools, and homes, using civilians as human shields.
Well, joining us now is former Director of Counterterrorism at the United Nations, Howard Stauffer, Dimitri Diliani, a spokesperson for Fatah's Democratic Reformist faction, and we still have with us in studio military and strategic affairs analyst Yaakov Lapin. So, Howard, I'm going to turn to you first. First of all, let's talk about the findings of this report. 8,119 deaths were verified in Gaza by the UN in the first 6 months of the war. That is a tragic number, but also a far cry from the claims of the Hamas-run health ministry that over 34,000 people were killed during that same time. So what is going on here?
I think what's happening here is that this is a propaganda war. This is a public relations war, and Hamas has been very effective in convincing the world that there are far more casualties among civilians than there should be, because the Israelis responded to the attack of October 7th when 1,500 Israelis were killed and 250 taken hostage. There's still hostages being kept in Gaza. Nobody mentions that in the United Nations. And what I find odd is that the United Nations is not focusing on other conflicts. What about in Ukraine? What about in Sudan, where tens of thousands of people are starving and tens of thousands of people are dying from the civil war there? So I find the UN is very uneven in being able to issue these reports, and I agree with Andrew Fox on many of the points that, this is not a war like World War II or even what's being fought in Ukraine. This is a guerrilla conflict, and you're trying to kill those who are coming up and having guns and shooting at the IDF, trying to kill as many as possible. And also, we should remember that the purpose of this war from the Hamas side was to kill all the Jews of Israel. It was not to push anybody out of Gaza. There was nobody in Gaza that the Israelis had forces in. And so the purpose of their war was to be genocide on their part. And now they continue to fight, even though we know that eventually their forces are going to have to surrender. They're going to have to give up whatever hostages they have. This cannot continue. And it's Hamas, after their leader, Sinhar, Yahweh Sinhar, had been killed.
Dimitri, I'd like to turn to you and kind of hear, your perspective on how Hamas goes about verifying who's a combatant and how they've been essentially rolling out these numbers, and how, of course, the report stands out in regards to what we're seeing from Hamas's reports.
Well, these are not Hamas's reports at all. And when the United Nations say that these are independently verified, they mean two independent sources. And why there are not too many independent sources in Gaza? Because Israel does not allow independent sources to go and verify. The health ministry have verified 44,000 people being dead. Now, people are still under the rubble after 1 year, more than 1 year of genocide. We expect the numbers and reasonably expect them to go up over 100,000 people. And also, when you want to minimize the numbers, let's also double check that the United Nations did not even verify the 7th of October's victims of 1,200 Israelis. So when you want to apply a standard, let's apply it across the board, even though nobody in their right mind would deny that what's going on in Gaza has been 13 months of genocide that were not created out of nothing, not out of thin air or vacuum. This is a genocide that is followed by a reaction to a military occupation and an escalating siege that has been going on since the early 90s in Gaza, with Gaza being a brink of disaster even before October 7th. And let's remember that before October 7th, Israel has killed 500 Palestinians, and there was no October 7th. There was no attack of Hamas. I'm not here to defend anybody. I'm not here to prove a point. If you want to talk to why October 7th happened, talk to Hamas, not me. I do not represent Hamas, but there's one thing that I am sure of. There is an ongoing genocide, and despicable media outlets like yours are trying to hide it with these fake people trying to spew lies.
No, actually, the reason that we're inviting you onto the show, just like we invited our other guest, is because we want to talk about the verification of these numbers. Hamas is 43,000. The UN says that they have 8,119 verified numbers. There could be many more people under the rubble. So I want to know what the process of verification is in doing this. Okay,
And
Yaakov,
the
listen,
problem of job
we didn't bring you on to attack the channel that's interviewing you and giving you a platform to speak. I'd like to turn to Yaakov to kind of hear about the verification process in this.
I'm not here to listen to lies. Also,
Again, we're talking about the process of verification. We're not talking about what's right and what's wrong here.
Intelligence in order for me to respect your platform.
Yeah.
It's simple as that.
So, look, this entire report is not serious. When we're talking about 8,000 verified casualties, that's highly misleading, because it's basically pretending to be a representative figure of the number of casualties in general in the Gaza Strip. These are the numbers that the UN claims it was able to verify. That's a very partial indication of the actual number of casualties. Now, nobody actually believes, in their right mind, to borrow a phrase here, that Hamas is going to be openly publishing the number of terrorists that it has lost. Nobody has any way of counting the number of dead terrorists except Hamas, and they're not sharing that information. Their interest, their obvious interest, is to present every casualty as a civilian. So presenting 8,000 casualties in the first 6 months of this war as somehow indicative of the actual casualty count is not serious. It's part of a propaganda effort against the state of Israel. Now, according to Israeli intelligence assessments, something like half of the casualties are combatants and half are civilians.
Right.
Every civilian casualty is a tragedy, and there's no question that the reason that those civilians are dead is because Hamas used them callously as human shields, because it knows that Israel is reluctant to go after Hamas terrorists when they're surrounded by civilians. The people who drew Gaza into war, the people who brought disaster on the Gaza Strip in a totally unprovoked manner in the pursuit of a jihadist genocidal ideology is Hamas. Israel did not choose this war, it did not choose the settings, and of course it would never fight this war if it didn't have to. So, I think that these kinds of reports don't serve the truth. We should acknowledge that we don't know the full casualty situation in the Gaza Strip. We should acknowledge that every civilian casualty is absolutely a tragedy. But to pretend that this number, the 70% number, is somehow indicative of the actual casualty picture in Gaza is simply not serious.
Now, Israel has said that it has killed a total of over 17,000 combatants since the start of the war against Hamas. They say that there's been a 1-to-1 combatant to civilian death ratio. So this would suggest that since the start of the war, a total of around 35,000 people were killed in Gaza, if we're taking the IDF's numbers as being valid, just as many outlets across the world will take the Hamas-run health ministry's numbers of now over 43,000 deaths as valid. So how is Hamas collecting these numbers? And again, how are these numbers being verified? How was the UN able to verify the numbers that it was able to verify up until this point? Howard, I'd like to hear your take.
Well, I think they're depending on numbers from the health ministry of Hamas. They're also depending on reports coming out of other countries in the region. But the truth is, these charges of genocide are not valid for many reasons. If the Israelis really wanted to, they wouldn't have been providing, as the United States has been asking, for 250 trucks every single day. The Prime Minister has promised to move that to 350 trucks. There are now 5 openings that have been operating to bring food into the area. The Jordan air corridor has now been restarted and reopened. The IDF is preparing for the winter and bringing in vaccines for the winter, bringing in clothing, repairing roads, building facilities. I mean, this is not what an army does if it's really out to destroy an entire civilian population. They are fighting there to stop the Hamas military from continuing this war against Israel and not having a repeat of it as it was after 2006. So these charges are all made up.
Dimitri, would you like to respond to what Howard just said?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is totally misleading, because at one point, slave owners used to say that doing well for the slaves. And when you say they are paving roads, they are actually dividing up Gaza into 3 parts with bombardments that followed up the Gaza Strip through paving these roads for military use. And when you say the discussions or the claims for genocide are substantial, we have to remember the ICJ, Human Rights Watch, almost every human rights organization called this a genocide. You cannot come up here and say just simply it's not a genocide. You remind me of a rhetoric that only comes out of supremacist genocidal ideologues, which you really represent now, trying to cover up for humanitarian catastrophe that you have caused. And when you talk about 250 trucks a day, before that, when the Israeli army, occupation army, used to calculate the calories for each resident of Gaza, as they boasted all the time, there were 500 trucks of aid coming into Gaza daily. And now with the genocide, with the forced displacement, with the ethnic cleansing, with almost 70% of homes being destroyed, with the civil infrastructures already obliterated, you're talking about 250. And that number is so inflated because you are not talking about averages. You're talking about some days where 250 trucks went in, but most of the days, zero comes in. That's why the World Food Program spoke of starvation as a weapon used by Israel, which is another genocidal charge to be added to the long list of genocidal charges against the city. Wake up and smell the coffee and stop living in this cloud that you know deep down inside nothing in the world justifies the killing of almost 18 or 19,000 children. And speaking, I mean, your researcher person that claims to be a researcher in that you just interviewed before, claiming that these are fighters, 5, 4, 3, 2-year-olds are fighters. This is so dehumanizing that reflects the hate, racism, supremacy that is in the mind of every self-proclaimed Zionist today. Everybody that is a genocide denier is no different than any war criminal on the ground killing children today in Gaza. Wake up and smell the coffee, people.
All right, Yaakov, we're going to let you close out this conversation because we're going to have to move on to our next story right now.
All right. Well, look, this kind of crazy rhetoric is unfortunately all too common, and we hear it, all over the West. This is nothing but really just running interference for Hamas, for its war, for its cynical use of Gazan civilians. The fact of the matter is every major Western military knows that the IDF goes further than any other military in the world to try and protect civilians, even as Hamas uses them as human shields. Right now in Jabalia, I can tell you, in northern Gaza, that Hamas terrorists are not letting their own families leave their house. They're not letting their families, even though they know that will likely lead to their deaths. This is who we're dealing with, and this is what the likes of the previous guest is trying to cover up. And we here have to be very clear about the truth. We are fighting an evil jihadist force who is bringing terror not only upon the people of Israel, but also upon the people of Gaza.
All right. Well, I mean, I think we're unable to kind of get a clear understanding of how these numbers are verified, and the independent, organizations that are verifying these numbers. Again, obviously, that was kind of the conversation that we were trying to have here. We went onto a different path here, but I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us right now. We are going to be turning to a very, very different topic now. Somaliland's opposition National Party has defeated incumbent President Bihi in a landslide victory. And this means that the self-declared republic faces a crucial moment in its quest for stability and international recognition. These elections are seen as a key test for the region's democratic institutions, and our Alex Schloss has the story.
Somaliland opposition leader Abdirahman Kiro defeated incumbent President Musa Bihi Abdi, setting up a handover of power as the unrecognized breakaway Somali region of Somaliland pushes for global recognition. Over 1 million voters took part in the elections. The Wadani National Party captured 63.92% of the vote, compared with Bihi's 34.81%. Bihi promised during the campaign that he would respect the results of the election. 3 candidates faced off in the elections, with each seeking to consolidate the region's fragile democracy, boost economic growth, and gain international recognition that the territory has struggled to secure for 33 years. Somaliland maintained relative stability and de facto independence since 1991.
Somaliland is a full functioning government. It has political parties. It has currencies. It's different from Somalia. It has stability. It has everything that government needs, all the elements of the state, so that international community should support Somaliland. They should look Somaliland because Somaliland is a stable country. It's a democratic country.
The election came amid heightened tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia over an agreement that Ethiopia signed with Somaliland. The deal would grant Ethiopia 50 years of access to 20 kilometers of Red Sea coastline in exchange for potential recognition of Somaliland independence, drawing the ire of Mogadishu. This is the 4th presidential election since the region broke away from the rest of the country, and despite the instability dominating Somaliland's surroundings, a peaceful transition of power is expected.
All right, we are turning to a bit of a lighter story here. The United Nations is set to mark the International Day of Persons with Disabilities on December 3rd to promote awareness about the rights and well-being of the community at every level. Now, one Israeli tech company has been making waves in this space, and joining us now is the CEO of Sign Now, Tomer Levy, with more. So, Tomer, tell us about what your company actually does. And I see you have a football on the table, which is very exciting.
Thank you, Natasha.
Yeah.
Sign Now is a startup who solves today the challenge of 90 million deaf people. We help them with emergency and crisis, also in service provided, and also in international events to be accessible, like we did in the first Accessible World Cup. It was because of I-24 News. 2 years we came here with an idea, and the item made everyone to agree to this mission. But I came here with another thing that I want to show and to bring to the table, a very ambitious plan. We are going to be in the UN at December 3rd, the International Day for the Rights of People with Disabilities.
Right.
And we have an ambitious plan. It's called Making Peace Accessible. Just saying, not just Sign Now, we have so many great impact entrepreneurs in Israel that are changing the reality today. And we have some great technologies that can implement tomorrow morning in all over the Middle East.
Right, so let's talk about that. I understand that you're going to be heading to the UN for the International Day of Disabilities. What are you actually planning to reveal while you're there? What does this plan entail?
So the plan is that Sign Now has a great technology to help 1.3 billion people with disabilities, also in the Middle East, but also around the world. With P2P collaborations, we can implement tomorrow morning our technology in other states. Just to understand, we did it before in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Qatar. We help deaf people all over the world. We tell them all the time, we don't care where you come from, we do not care about politics. We just want to help 90 million deaf people to be a part of the society. And this is our plan. And it's our vision because, you know, I was in the Zionist Congress in Basel with the Worldwide Zionist Congress, and we spoke there so much about hope and entrepreneurship and great solutions from Israel. And I said, let's take this vision and let's do something with the day after the war in Israel and around the world. So we try to use impact consensus issue as something that we can use as a trust to start speaking about peace in the future. This is the idea, to use those technologies to help so many people that need the solutions right now.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as the war has been raging, many Israeli tech companies, you know, have been impacted. How has your company been impacted by this ongoing war?
October 7, 6:29 alarms. In 12 o'clock in that morning, we had, from then on, for a few months, 24/7 service providing for emergency for the deaf community in Israel. We help them to cross the borders in Egypt and Jordan to escape from the area of Gaza and also to come from other airports to Israel. By the way, we did it also in Ukraine. We helped to dozens of deaf people, Jewish deaf people, to escape to Israel. The same in earthquake in Turkey, the same in the storm in Africa. We have a very simple solution. With one click, any deaf anywhere can upload a specific interpreter and to speak with anybody he needs, and to sometimes it's to save his life, sometimes it's to speak with the doctor, sometimes to speak with the insurance, whatever they need to be independent. That's what we do.
Amazing. All right, well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Really fascinating to hear about the work that you're doing, and good luck.
Can I say last sentence if it's fine?
Yes.
It's important for us to show the good face of Israel. And just to say that I think that we are in the beginning of the next revolution from Israel, by the people of Israel, the state of Israel, the Jewish communities all over the world, also to fight the anti-Semitism, but also to bring a big vision to this world and the Middle East. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tomer. All right. Well, with thousands of Israeli soldiers and civilians alike suffering from the effects of PTSD in the wake of October 7th and the ongoing war with Hamas and Hezbollah, it's reaching a level that some are calling an epidemic. An impressive nonprofit called Brothers in Yoga has now created hope and much more needed healing tools that are already proving to be a lifesaver. And our correspondent Emily Francis has the details.
They say yoga is a way of life. But for some, yoga post-October 7th is a matter of life and death.
I meditated early in the morning of October 7th. I was drinking my tea and checking messages on my phone. That's when all the craziness started happening. And then a world war starts. It was something completely unproportional. I thought to myself, where is my place on this day?
Ohad Meir became a certified yoga teacher after suffering PTSD from his military service in a combat unit.
I define myself as a fighter. I worked security in the army for 12 years. My PTSD didn't hold me back at work. It affected me at home. It continues at home. The war continues at home. Most Israelis come back to their routine one way or another, but the PTSD symptoms will be much worse.
On the morning of October 7th, Ohad suited up to do his part to combat Hamas terrorists, only to re-trigger his post-trauma.
I felt my job was getting in the way of my doing yoga workshops for the soldiers. There's nothing more important right now. They even offered me a raise at the end of the year. But this is my personal mission. I told my boss I don't want to come off like an idiot, but I'm leaving.
Ohad is part of an impressive nonprofit called Brothers in Yoga, which is helping soldiers with PTSD get onto a path toward healing.
All right, that's it for now from Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Shalom and welcome to Jewish World Weekly. I'm Khaled Ben David, and each week we're going to bring you the latest from the Jewish world, from politics to religion, entertainment to the latest trends, and everything in between. Join me each week as we explore the global Jewish diaspora. Don't miss Jewish World Weekly only on I-24 News.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
is the rundown on I-24 News. I'm Benita Levine. Hezbollah rocket fire persists. Missiles have today been launched at northern and central Israel once again. Also, today, U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein maintains there is a real opportunity to end the fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. That's after his meeting with Lebanon's Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, in Beirut earlier on Tuesday. The new Hezbollah leader, Naim Qassem, postponing his expected speech following these latest discussions in the Lebanese capital. 410 days since the Hamas terror assault on southern Israel on the 7th of October, Hezbollah has been showing its support for Hamas in Gaza since then. IDF troops further deepening their operation on the ground in Lebanon, working to eliminate the threat on Israel's north. More in this report by our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osaran.
Deal or no deal? Deal or no deal?
U.S. Special Envoy Amos Hochstein arrived in Beirut on Tuesday after Hezbollah responded positively to the American ceasefire proposal, apart from minor wording changes. Following his meeting with Lebanese Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, designated by Hezbollah to represent them in the talks on the American proposal, Hochstein said the sides continued to significantly narrow the gaps.
I came back because we have a real opportunity to bring this conflict to an end. This is a moment of decision-making. It is now within our grasp. So as the window is now, I hope the coming days yield a resolute decision.
While the main point of contention remains Israel's demand to operate freely in light of any violation, the deal reportedly refers to all of Lebanon, not just its southern part. In addition to the removal of Hezbollah forces and the deployment of the Lebanese army in the south, the deal would also see security arrangements in Beirut, the seaport and international port, to prevent any weapons from reaching Hezbollah via Syria.
We are currently talking about negotiations for a ceasefire and possible arrangements that the Americans are leading. I say it's only done under fire, and it's done with a lot of fire. We demand the removal of Hezbollah beyond the Litani River, as well as other issues that I will not disclose here. But the important thing is not the document itself. Even if there is a ceasefire, no one can promise that it will hold.
Despite the diplomatic optimism, the sides continue to escalate reciprocal blows. Throughout Tuesday, Hezbollah launched dozens of rockets and drones at northern and central Israel, where sirens have become a daily occurrence. 5 people were lightly hurt in the attacks after Monday night saw a deadly missile strike on Shfaram, killing 1 woman and injuring dozens, including 18 children. In Lebanon, the IDF continued to strike Hezbollah targets in southern Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and southern Lebanon, from the air and on the ground. In one of the villages, IDF troops uncovered a weapons depot in a schoolyard, further proof of Hezbollah's cynical use of civilian infrastructure to cover its terror activities. And so, each side is expected to seek maximizing achievements in the field as the diplomatic efforts push forward.
We don't have agreement. If we did, we'd be out announcing it and trumpeting it from the rooftops. But we believe that we're seeing progress, and we think both sides, both the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, have indicated a willingness to get this done and to get it done on a short time frame.
So for the latest on the ground, we now go live to correspondent Emmanuel Anora. She joins us from Haifa in northern Israel. And Emmanuel, Hezbollah rocket fire continuing today, targeting northern and central Israel yet again. And yet another Israeli soldier killed in fighting in southern Lebanon. Tell us more about the day's developments across the northern front.
Right, Benita. It's been, as you said, another day of cross-border attacks between Hezbollah and the Israeli army. And the IDF releasing a statement earlier saying that over 75 rockets were launched and dozens of drones were launched by Hezbollah from South Lebanon into northern Israel, but not just, also to central Tel Aviv earlier this morning, as we saw. And in fact, the Arabic spokesperson, Avichai Adrai, also said that those rockets actually in fact, landed in UNIFIL outposts. So some of the Hezbollah rockets. So just goes to show such a delicate situation going on right now on the border within this war between Hezbollah and Israeli forces. And this is really all going on, and it's such a contrast with the positive statements coming out of the diplomatic efforts, the talks that are ongoing in Beirut, as U.S. Envoy Amos Hochstein is in Beirut right now, and he is supposed to make his way, according to reports, tomorrow morning to Tel Aviv. And he said that there is hope here. There is a positive outcome, hopefully, for what might actually reach a deal, a ceasefire deal between Hezbollah and Israel. So with all of these crossfire attacks and still IDF operation continuing in South Lebanon, and also striking still in other parts of Lebanon. There were strikes in Nabatea, in Baalbek, which is further north. The reports of strikes and reports of over 20 people killed in Lebanon. Now it's important, and over 100 injured, in fact, as well. But it is important to note that in these cases there is no differentiation between simple civilians and Hezbollah operatives in these numbers. So it is important to make that distinction. But again, Benita, this really is all coming at a time of hopeful clarity between what might be an actual ceasefire, a breakthrough between Hezbollah and Israel, Benita.
Certainly, the region is watching to see how it all unfolds. Thank you so much for now. Appreciate the update. Correspondent Emmanuel Anora in Haifa in northern Israel. Thanks, Emmanuel. Now, for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Neria, former Deputy Head of Assessment in the Israeli Military Intelligence and the former Foreign Policy Advisor to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and our correspondent Zach Anders. Gentlemen, thank you both so much for being here. So Amos Hochstein has been in Beirut, said to be making his way to Israel. You know this region so well. Jacques, your assessment on the messaging coming out from the envoy who has been here umpteen times during this war?
You know, Hochstein is the champion of ambiguity. This is typical American policy, typical American behavior in negotiations. You don't know where you stand. You don't know where you stand, and ambiguity is the name of the game. Now, remember, Hochstein promised us after the maritime agreement with Lebanon that we would have peace in the area, that we would have, and the Lebanese would enjoy the fruits of gas being found in Block 9 and Block 4 in Lebanon, and nothing of that just transpired. To such a point that Hezbollah, the Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah just gave some attributes to Hochstein I would repeat, and basically he did not trust him anymore. So I think that what Hochstein is trying to bring two opposing positions that cannot be bridged. The Lebanese will not accept any right of Israel of hot pursuit inside Lebanese territory at any cost. The Lebanese would not accept to deploy forces on their border with Syria in order to prevent weapons coming from Iran through Syria to Lebanon. So these are 2 points that Hezbollah will never accept. Not only Hezbollah will never accept, all the Lebanese factions will not accept that. So where are we driving to? We are driving to a situation where there's no possibility of bridging anything, because Hezbollah just is waiting on the corner, laughing. And since he has agreed that Nabih Berri, the Speaker of the Parliament, represents him, so he has to stay. Now, if we reach a ceasefire, then he's a champion. He would say to his audience and to all the Arab world, we have fought the most powerful army in the Middle East for more than a year, and we have survived. And they didn't succeed in defeating us. And if there is no ceasefire, he says that he has enough weapons to continue to fight Israel, not only for months, but maybe for years. So this is where we stand right now. This week is crucial. And in my view, the chances of reaching an agreement are very slim.
Where does that leave Israel when Amos Hochstein arrives in Tel Aviv tomorrow? That's when he's expected. They have vowed that they're going to make it safe for the tens of thousands of evacuated Israelis who have moved from their homes throughout this war. Some of them moved more than a year ago now, and they're waiting to find out when it's safe to go back home. Where does it leave Israel's leverage when these talks continue tomorrow?
If you look at what's happening on the ground, and you'll see that the IDF is driving on two axes. One axis in the east through Al Khiyam village, or a small town that leads you into the Bekaa Valley, and another axis is east of Tyre, of Sidon, and in order just to engulf the area in such a movement that most of the second ridge villages will be under Israeli control. By that time, if we reach that, then all the artillery, the direct artillery, anti-tank weapons that Hezbollah has been using to destroy all the houses would be in our hands. And this is where we are expected to meet at the end of the day. If there's no agreement on the ground, if there's no international force that would be supervising the area, if the Lebanese army is not able to just disarm Hezbollah, this is where we are directing ourselves.
And complicating matters even further, our correspondent Zach Anders, your insights into something Emmanuel referred to in her report, the fact that Hezbollah rockets hit UNIFIL headquarters in southern Lebanon. What is confirmed? What is the reaction so far?
You know, the last 2 weeks has been incredible to watch UNIFIL outwardly admitting to incidents that are taking place. They've had car accidents, they've had shootouts, they've had members of UNIFIL injured in the chaos that's taking place outside and inside the conflict zone. So the UNIFIL incidents, although they've had rockets falling on their posts, they've also had incidents in Sidon and to the north and in other cities as well. One of the interesting things 2 weeks ago is we were in southern Lebanon with, I believe, if I'm remembering right, it was the 36th
Division, yes.
Yeah, we were driving back out of Lebanon, and the Humvees don't have their lights on, so you can't see anything. Total darkness in most of southern Lebanon. The electricity's out, so you can't see anything. No moon. And as we're coming around a bend, suddenly the dirt road is filled with light, and it's a UNIFIL position. And as we're driving past this UNIFIL position with shipping containers that's kind of boxed in, I say it would maybe no more than 50 yards across for this UNIFIL outpost. And on the watchtower, 2 UNIFIL soldiers with their binoculars and their night vision watched us drive down the road. And the Israeli soldiers waved and went hello, and nothing. You didn't get any reaction. I'm sure that, you know, they've been watching the...
They should have spoken Italian.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they've been seeing these trucks drive past them every day, and there's no room for nonsense for them. But it's remarkable to see how entrenched they are in these positions along the border, and they've stayed there throughout the duration of this conflict. And it should probably speak for itself, the fact that the IDF has now moved past these positions. There hasn't been a fatality, a serious incident. There has been rocket fire on these positions, the UNIFIL positions on the border. But as we see in the last 48 hours, this conversation that UNIFIL, the statement they put out about an incident directed fire towards their position, it was all but Hezbollah in name, but they would not name Hezbollah as a culprit or an involved party in the fire in their direction.
Well, we certainly continue to see the reaction from various entities linked to those latest UNIFIL developments. Gentlemen, stay with us. We've got much to discuss. As we turn to Gaza specifically, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yisrael Katz have gone into the Strip. The Prime Minister and the new Defense Minister going into the Netzarim corridor together. Netanyahu discussing IDF achievements in the Strip and offering a reward of $5 million for each freed hostage and free passage to each terrorist who helps secure their freedom and passage to their family too. Take a listen.
Here in the center of the Gaza Strip and in all parts of the Strip, we have achieved excellent results in our important goal. Hamas will not control Gaza. We are eliminating its military capabilities in an extremely impressive way. We are moving on to its governing capabilities, and more is to come. Hamas will not be in Gaza. We are also making efforts from here and everywhere to locate our hostages and bring them back. I want to say to those holding our hostages, anyone who dares harm them, his blood is on his head. We will pursue you, and we will catch you. I also want to say to those who want to get out of this maze, whoever brings us a hostage will find a safe way out, along with their family. We will also offer a reward of $5 million for each hostage. Choose. The choice is yours.
Still in studio, retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Narier and correspondent Zach Anders. And Jacques, I want to start with the optics of looking there, of those images, the helmets, the vests, the Prime Minister, the new Defense Minister sharing that message.
Well, you know, incorrectly, the vest and the helmet.
The thing is, I mean, it's funny to look at them wearing that gear, but I mean, okay, we are at war. You cannot expect that to follow the fashion. Anyway, I think that what the Prime Minister said is, in fact, illustration of the failure of the policies of this government since October the 7th.
The reward?
The reward, exactly. I mean, because I mean, the policy was very simple. We would pressurize as much as possible on the military field to such extent that Hamas would have no choice but to yield, and it did not happen. We thought that this would happen after we would reach Gaza City, and then Khan Yunis, and then Rafah, and then and from all it seems that there is a failure in the intelligence, in gathering the intelligence relevant to the hostages. We are very good in targeting people, targeting leaders, targeting decapitating, I mean, the field leadership and the other leadership of Hamas, but we are unable to reach a situation where we know what's going on with our hostages, and we can reach them and accept, and liberate them. The problem is that in November, when we had this deal was not the result of military pressure. The deal was the result of diplomacy. And this is the thing that this government is refusing to do, because there's a price to pay for that, and the price is not $5 million per head. The price is several hundred, maybe thousands of Palestinian prisoners in our jails, and this government is not ready to pay, because the coalition would just burst out, and this government would not exist the minute our Prime Minister would accept this deal.
Your thoughts, very briefly, Zach.
Yeah, well, for the reason why I said worn incorrectly, the chin strap and the vest on the Prime Minister was both incorrect. But the optics, the being there on the coastline inside Gaza, I think that speaks for itself. The fact that the IDF has control over these areas, that they're willing to bring in the leader of this nation and have them walk along the beach and not be susceptible to sniper rocket fire. The point of this war at this stage, knowing that the IDF is still heavily engaged in northern Gaza, a $5 million offer for a hostage, I can only imagine, and maybe I'll reach out tonight and speak to some of the hostage families. I can only imagine, I would think for my son or daughter is worth more than $5 million, is worth more. You can't put a price on. It just, to me, seems so blasé to come out and to make a statement and say, at this stage, 400 days on, we'll take a deal for $500 for a human life. We'll take $5 million. It just doesn't seem right.
Well, we're actually going to be speaking to a father of one of the hostages in Gaza a little bit later on in the show, so that no doubt will come up shortly. Stay with us, because you mentioned diplomacy, and we asked the question, where are the Hamas negotiators. Well, Qatar says the terror group's leaders are not in Doha, but their office there has not been permanently closed. Well, Qatar, the United States and Egypt had been trying for months to secure a truce hostage deal, as we've been discussing. No success so far. And in recent days, Qatar is saying it's pausing its mediation efforts. Doha has been hosting Hamas leaders for the past 12 years. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken had said last week that Qatar had asked Hamas officials to leave, but it's not clear if that has in fact happened. Here's the latest from the Foreign Ministry's Majed Mohammed Al-Ansari. Let's take a listen.
Leaders of Hamas that are within the negotiating team are now not in Doha, and as you know, they move between different capitals. I don't want to get into the details of what that means, but what I can tell you very clearly is that the office of Hamas in Doha was created for the sake of the mediation process. Obviously, when there is no mediation process, the office itself doesn't have any function other than being part of the mediation process. So at the moment, I can confirm that they are not in Doha, but I won't go into the details of how that, what that means, basically.
Retired Colonel Dr. Jacques Nahir, Qatar has been hosting Hamas leaders for years. What do you make of these comments and the fact that they are somewhere in another country? Your assessment?
Well, you know, diplomacy has several facets. One of them is lying openly and with a smile. So, I mean, can you really believe that what he says? And I'm definitely sure that he knows exactly their whereabouts, who is left in Qatar, how much of them are still active in Qatar, and how many of them have just landed in Turkey and met with Erdogan, or been in Lebanon or in Syria. I mean, this is the way they travel all the time. The only place, I mean, they don't like so much, it's Iran.
Well, one can certainly understand as much. Fresh U.S. sanctions, Zach, against Hamas members in Turkey. They're based there. What more is known about those fresh steps?
Yeah, the Treasury Department stating today Hamas continues to rely on key officials who seemingly maintain legitimate public-facing roles within the group, yet who facilitate their terrorist activities, represent their interests abroad, and coordinate the transfer of money and goods into Gaza. This is the statement from the Treasury Department. The sanctioning of these 6 men, one of the things that a lot of people have questions about when it comes to sanctions is, well, what does that actually look like? These individuals obviously are on terror watch lists to begin with, so It's not like they were going to get on a plane and be able to come through LaGuardia or JFK. But if they are opening bank accounts or doing business in certain places, the U.S. has a flag and a mechanism to stop them from being able to transfer money and funds. And that's really what this is targeting financial assets here.
What do you make of the fact that these sanctions are, in fact, being announced right now? Quickly.
Well, you know, these are among other things that the American administration is doing, but it's not something unusual. I mean, it's just happened. It's today. It could have been yesterday and the day after. I mean, there's nothing special in that. I mean, they follow up a policy, and the policy is as soon as you get some information, you just put the sanctions in place.
One of the interesting elements here about the release of, it's caught our attention about these 6 men who have been sanctioned, but at the same time, the Treasury Department also issuing sanctions for an additional Israeli settler group in the West Bank at the same time.
We will take
parity.
a deeper look at that a little bit later on. Stay with us as we ask the question, is Iran likely to try another direct strike on Israel? Well, in October, Tehran launching, of course, 181 missiles at Israel, killing 1 Palestinian man in the West Bank. In April this year, Iran's first direct strike was largely thwarted thanks to Israel's defense systems and help from its allies too. Last month, Israel launching airstrikes on several military targets in Iran, with Benjamin Netanyahu confirming on Sunday that those strikes hit a component of Iran's nuclear program. While the extent of that damage has yet to be confirmed by Tehran, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi now says his country considers itself fully entitled to respond to those Israeli strikes. Let's listen.
Regarding the latest attack by the Zionist regime, we have clearly told other countries that we consider it a new attack, and the Islamic Republic of Iran considers itself fully entitled to respond to this attack. This is part of our defense doctrine to respond to any attack. Regarding how and when this response will be given, we will calculate our response in due time and manner.
Fully entitled, it considers itself ready if it needs to. Is it likely, though, given the impact of the last strike by Israel on those military targets?
Well, the question that I ask myself is that, after all, I mean, the American administration asked specifically Israel not to attack nuclear facilities. And out of the 20 targets that Israel has chosen in Iran, one target specifically was a nuclear facility. And why did Israel do that? Because this facility was a secret that Iran has not recognized as existing. So I mean, and because of that, it cannot acknowledge the fact that it has been attacked. So it is inexistent for the Iranian and inexistent for everybody. So this leads us to the fact that on the intelligence, macro intelligence, we are very well positioned, and I think that what happened in the last attacks in Iran, we just burst into the air defense of Syria, Iraq, and then Iran, and Iran finds itself today almost with no air defense, open to any incursion of the Israeli Air Force, and this is one of the reasons that they're not in a hurry in responding.
I've got 30 seconds left until the break. How concerned are you, though, that proxies may be doing the dirty work?
Well, we are seeing that every day. We've seen drones coming from Iraq, from Yemen and other places. I mean, this is something that Iran is doing as a regular thing.
Certainly something we keep watching and we keep reporting on every single day. Dr. Jacques Naria, retired colonel, as always, appreciate your insights. Correspondent Zach Anders, thank you so much for your updates. Appreciate you both being here in studio on The Rundown. Right now, a very quick break, but when we get back, our coverage continues. Stay tuned. Back in just a short while.
You live in Israel or you are preparing for your Aliyah? Congratulations. You have a smartphone? Perfect. Download the Olim app for free and discover everything we have to offer. Booking medical and administrative appointments, bills paying, debt verification, instant translation, contractor recommendation, request tracking, and much more. And if you can't manage it on your own, our team speaks your language and assists you with all your procedures in Israel, starting from 199 shekels per month, unlimited and for the whole family. Don't hesitate any longer. Download the app or contact us.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
With us. Now, it's been 410 days since the Hamas terror rampage and mass abduction on the 7th of October. 101 hostages remain in captivity. It's not clear how many of the hostages are alive. Hamas has yet to provide proof of life. The plight of the American hostages taking center stage in the U.S. with several recent meetings, including at the White House. So now we welcome Ruby Chen, father of hostage Itai Chen, an IDF soldier and a U.S. citizen. Ruby, thank you so much. Always appreciate you speaking to us. Day 410 and still no deal to bring the hostages home. We saw in recent days President Joe Biden and President-elect Donald Trump shaking hands in that historic moment at the White House. The two men had also discussed the hostages during their meeting. What is your sense right now of the pressure the U.S. is exerting at the moment to get all the hostages home?
Yes, I would maybe rephrase the question a bit. I would maybe rephrase it and say, what are the parties, Israel and Hamas, doing in order to get to a end of war, ceasefire, release the hostages? The U.S. is a facilitator. Yes, they do have equity. Equity meaning both U.S. citizens, but also emotional equity invested in us, the U.S. citizens. But the key has always been, what is Israel willing to provide, and what is Hamas willing to accept? As they do have our loved ones, my son Itai for over 410 days, we have not heard anything from him. And I can only go to my prime minister here in Israel and demand from him to bring him back.
And just a short while ago, talking about your Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, earlier in the day, he was in the Netzarim corridor offering a reward of $5 million for each freed hostage and free passage to each terrorist who helps, also free passage to the families of that terrorist. What is your response to that offer? What kind of message would you want to give to the Prime Minister about this strategy, so to speak?
So, Manita, I would challenge you and maybe use a different adjective and not say strategy. It sounds more like a tactic. I would hope to believe that after 410 days, the Prime Minister that visited Netzarim today would not say what he's not willing, which he said again and again, that Hamas will not stay in power. I expect him to say what he is willing to do and what he is willing to offer to bring back 101 Israeli citizens that under his watch were taken hostage. And he needs to repair that from an obligation that he has to us, not just a legal obligation, but a Jewish obligation, to be able to say after 410 days, he had a plan. The army did what it should. It has been able to destroy Hamas. This is what the former Secretary of Defense Gallant has said, as well as we've heard that from the United States as well. And now's the time to find a way to get the hostages out. I could share with you a little bit about what we learned from the United States.
Please do.
We, from the intelligence they shared with us, Hamas has been able to replenish its troops on the ground. They have the ability to continue this guerrilla warfare for a long time. And the message that the U.S. got from Minister Derma that just visited last week, both President Putin in Russia, President-elect Trump in Miami, as well as the White House officials, was that the same type of sentence we got from the Prime Minister about a year ago. Hamas is that close of breaking, and we just need a little bit more time. That is the same sentence I've been hearing for over a year. And the U.S. do not believe that Hamas is close to getting to a breaking point. And the question is, what is the Prime Minister and his government willing to do? Is my child Itai supposed to be sacrificed? Or is there a better solution than what we have seen him propose to date?
I certainly hear the point that you are making, that the discussions are what Hamas will agree to, what Israel will agree to, but there is no doubt with 7 of the hostages being American. We know what President Joe Biden has voiced over the last year and a bit. We also know what President-elect Donald Trump has said. It won't matter to the families which president manages to put that pressure on the stakeholders to reach some kind of a deal. But your take, given all these meetings you've had with the president, with senators in different cities, in different parts of the United States, your sense of the impact that the U.S. could have now and come January?
Yes, I could share that in the meeting that we had with President Biden a few hours before he indeed met President-elect Trump. They could have talked about dozens of topics. It was important for President Biden to share with us that he shared with President-elect Trump the urgency of the hostages, and that he calls for the incoming administration to work immediately with the existing administration. I know for a fact that the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, reached out to his counterpart, Mr. Waltz, and offered him to come in and work together on bipartisan issues, such as the hostage issue, as well as President Biden suggested or recommended to President-elect to meet the families and create that same type of emotional connection that hopefully will bring us to where we want to get to. President Trump at the Republican National Convention in July stated very clearly that if he's elected president and if by January 20th the hostages are still in captivity, hell is going to break loose. And he will do things that maybe this current administration was not willing to do. So if I was Hamas, I would heed those words of caution, and I would very much suggest them to find a way to get a deal, because if by January 20th this is not done, it's going to be very unpleasant to them and all of their people.
Ruby Chen, father of Itai Chen, we so appreciate you speaking to us. The heart of the nation is with the families of all the hostages. Thank you very much, as always, for being with us on I-24 News.
Thank you, and have a good night.
One cannot imagine the pain and the waiting. Now we turn our attention to Cyprus. The Larnaca Marathon attracts thousands of runners from around the globe each year. So why was this year different from others? Well, it's connected to our previous story, because Sunday's race included a group of 30 Israeli runners highlighting the plight of the 101 hostages in captivity in Gaza, each runner wearing a picture of one of the hostages on their running vests. We spoke to organizer and runner Odiel Ilani about the initiative. Let's take a listen.
We were 30 Israelis who didn't know each other 2 days ago. I mean, we never saw each other 2 days ago. We gathered each other through the goal to run with images of the abductees printed on our T-shirt. So each person had a picture of a different hostage. Some felt extremely connected with the abductees they choose. Some choose randomly, because what is important is that everybody, every one of them will return. Larnaca Marathon is full of people, and a lot of Israelis are there, so it was extremely meaningful and emotional to see how the impact and how much people were moved by this gesture of support and this act of solidarity. People on the side, on the road, were also acclaiming us, and a few people talk with us about the situation and supported strongly our initiative. What we wanted also is we had a photographer with us, so we were able to take picture, beautiful picture and meaningful picture of these people running, each of us with one hostage, and we will spread the word with this picture to say our determination, because running a marathon, it's the message. We have determination, we have commitment, we like effort, and we will go until the end.
Odiel Ilani speaking to I-24 News. Now, turning our focus to another war. Ukraine is today marking 1,000 days since Russia's invasion, or what Russia called its special operation. In a major boost in recent days, outgoing US President Joe Biden giving the green light for American missiles to be used against targets deeper inside Russia. Ukraine says its forces will never surrender, while the Kremlin is also pledging victory and while also threatening to use its nuclear might. So for more, we now welcome the Ukrainian ambassador to Israel, Yevhen Kornichuk. Thank you so much, Ambassador. So appreciate you being here. It's such a grim milestone, Ukraine marking 1,000 days since the start of the war. How are you seeing the new US administration impacting the way this war unfolds, or potentially the way it could end?
First of all, I am grateful that we finally received this decision of the current administration to use the long-range missiles on a Russian territory. And they was used today. In fact, the first stockpiles of the Russian missiles was successfully destroyed this morning.
Right.
And we expect to do more. Otherwise, it was look like, you know, when you have no such an opportunity, you've been fighting with the cuffed hands. You know, if you cannot shoot outside of the Ukrainian territory. Definitely, that would be, to a big extent, the game changer. But coming back to your question, is clearly, I happened to be in Washington last week and the week before, right during the election in New York, and I saw it was calm and quiet in DC at that time, so which show it like, you know, the real election, when the loser call to the winner and say congratulations. So it was very good, and I do hope that we have to look on this election as an opportunity for both of our countries. Basically, Ukrainian President Zelensky is having a pretty good relations with President-elect, and he was one of just a few European leaders that met him when he was in New York last month. So we are looking on this whole development of the situation as a big opportunity for both of our nations. As President Trump has said many times, so he would be looking for the just end of the war in both Middle East, in Israel and in Ukraine, so which is very important sign.
President-elect also has an interesting relationship with Vladimir Putin, of course. How worried are you about their sometimes warm, sometimes not so warm relationship?
I'm sure that he will try to show his leadership, and as they say, make America great again, meaning that not just the internal issues would be on his focus, but external as well. And definitely Israel is on his heart. And Ukraine is also something that he has been taking much effort to resolve the conflict. As far as I know, a few think tanks in Washington started working already on the possible opportunities for the change and for the end of the bloodshed in both places, in Israel and Ukraine. So I has had the opportunity to meet with all major American Jewish organizations and the lobbyists with the AIPAC, etc. So that's quite an experience, and I think that we've been speaking about interrelations of both conflicts, unfortunately, both in Ukraine and Israel. And the proof is the recent commissioning of the big stockpiles of the Russian fresh weapon in Lebanese territory. Meaning that Russia is clearly involved in this conflict as well, which is very unfortunate. But at the same time, we are having the same enemy, but we also have the same friends, which is the United States and most of the NATO countries.
What then do you make of the suggestion that Israel might want to include Russia in a possible agreement with Lebanon, that Russia would help prevent weapons smuggling from Syria to Hezbollah? We know about the report in the Wall Street Journal suggesting that most of the weapons the IDF found in South Lebanon in the first days of the operation were of Russian origin, as you are alluding to.
Exactly, and this is not just a Lebanese case. If you look on a broader picture, you will see the Houthis in Yemen that been using the Russian missiles as well. So I think, I mean, I'm not the one to criticize your government, but I do believe that Russia is clearly taking the side, and this is not a side of Israel. Unfortunately, they've been in a very deep relations with Iran. Unfortunately, not just on those armament things, because as you know that Iranians gave the licenses to Russians to produce the Iranian drones, and now they've been producing them by hundreds per day in Russia. And they're attacking Ukraine all the time with those drones. So we have the same enemies and we have the same challenges. So we definitely need to coordinate more in order to achieve just peace for both of our nations as quickly as possible.
You made mention of the fact that Moscow has already said that Ukraine has fired 6 American long-range missiles for the first time on Russia's internationally recognized territory. As you said, it was straight after President Joe Biden gave the green light. No wasting of time there. How worried are you, though, about the Russian reaction?
Well, we proved many times that it's no red lines in our situation. When we successfully attack the officially recognized Kursk territory, for example, and that's supposed to be not just to prove that Russia have no such boundaries, but simply to defend our people that living in the proximity to the Russian border. I'm talking about city of Sumy and Kharkiv, which are very close. So that was the reason. So we show many times, so it's not such a thing. You might also mention that today the Russians has approved the new strategy for the use of the nuke, but I'm not sure whether they have the capability to use this nuke. You know, you can see that the last arrangements to try was not very successful. But again, I will rather not provoke, but we are fighting for our freedom and independence, and we prove to be strong until now and show that we are brave people fighting for our nation's democracy and integrity, and that's what we've been doing successfully, and I'm sure we will prevail.
Talking about the threats out of Russia, no doubt you will know that former President Dmitry Medvedev took to X to say Russia's new nuclear doctrine means NATO missiles fired against the country could be deemed an attack by the bloc on Russia, and Russia could retaliate against Kyiv and key NATO facilities wherever they're located. That means, his words, World War III. Your response?
Well, once again, we are not the one that started this conflict. And we really want to finish it as fast as possible because our people are dying every single day on the front line. Forget about Russians. I wouldn't care much, you know, how many soldiers have they lost. I mean, we do care about our own people, and I'm sure that Israelis do the same. So we are not the one that starts, and we want to stop this bloodshed as quickly as possible because the people is our major, you know, concern is about our people's life.
And as everyone can imagine, of course, each country dealing with its security concerns. Israel obviously focused on the war here, but what can you tell us briefly about cooperation between the Israeli and Ukrainian governments at this juncture?
Well, I should say that after the October 7th, the cooperation became much faster and stronger. And some Israeli experts admit our superb expertise with the drones and anti-drone system, which is clearly greater than the Israel has had before. this October 7th. So I should say that we've been doing a lot in order to strengthen our cooperation, and definitely we could do more, especially at the wartime. I am never satisfied with what we're receiving now, or what kind of cooperation is there, because I think we can do more, even now. But definitely we are in a much better position now than we used to be, unfortunately, before the war in Israel has started.
Challenges remain, no doubt about it, on all fronts. Ukrainian Ambassador to Israel, Yevgen Kornichuk, we so appreciate you being here in studio. Thank you very much for being with us on I-24 News. Now, talking about the war, post-traumatic stress disorder during wartime, dealing with PTSD is becoming a priority for many. A non-profit organization called Brothers in Yoga is offering hope and much-needed support, as our Emily Francis discovered when she went to Moshav Mata. Let's take a look.
They say yoga is a way of life. But for some, yoga post-October 7th is a matter of life and death.
I meditated early in the morning of October 7th. I was drinking my tea and checking messages on my phone. That's when all the craziness started happening. And then a world war starts. It was something completely unproportional. I thought to myself, where is my place on this day?
Ohad Meir became a certified yoga teacher after suffering PTSD from his military service in a combat unit.
I define myself as a fighter. I worked security in the army for 12 years. My PTSD didn't hold me back at work. It affected me at home. It continues at home. The war continues at home. Most Israelis come back to their routine one way or another, but the PTSD symptoms will be much worse.
On the morning of October 7th, Ohad suited up to do his part to combat Hamas terrorists, only to re-trigger his post-trauma.
I felt my job was getting in the way of my doing yoga workshops for the soldiers. There's nothing more important right now. They even offered me a raise at the end of the year. But this is my personal mission. I told my boss I don't want to come off like an idiot, but I'm leaving.
Ohad is part of an impressive nonprofit called Brothers in Yoga, which is helping soldiers with PTSD get onto a path toward healing.
Is it a crisis? Oh, completely a crisis. I would say that it felt like a crisis before October 7th, just a crisis that no one talks about. But if you looked at numbers, it was already, tens of thousands of people dealing with PTSD, not talking about it.
Netta Margali, the founder of Brothers in Yoga, says the growing wave of soldiers trying to settle back into daily life after going through fighting in Gaza has reached a critical juncture. And this particular yoga practice is pivotal for the body, mind, and soul.
It's amazing beyond words to see what happens when someone is dealing with PTSD and is a model for the participants that come. Directly, they want to be the next teacher too, because they see the growth, they see the opportunity to heal very, very deeply and to help others.
Ohad is now teaching yoga to both soldiers and reservists on their military bases, as well as groups of veterans with PTSD. Similarly, there's a program called Sisters in Yoga for female soldiers and also women like Inbar Franco, who is still suffering from the residual effects of surviving a terror attack.
I feel yoga has given me a foundation in life. It really gives me stability. During the last few years, my life was topsy-turvy and I was ungrounded.
Inbar is now also a certified yoga instructor, which is giving her purpose.
Everyone is experiencing trauma during this stage of life. Everyone here is going through a huge trauma.
Today, there are many layers of the trauma. It's also families who were murdered on October the 7th. It's also the women who were kidnapped, soldiers who were wounded or lost friends in the war. Everyone is affected on a soul level.
Clinical psychologist and member of the Brothers in Yoga team, Dr. Shachar Mor Yosef, has been specializing in PTSD for decades, but says the scale of what the entire country has experienced since October 7th will take a generation to heal.
My specialty is post-trauma. It takes time to understand how to treat. It's going to take many years, at least 20 years.
But studies do show that this ancient practice and the tools gained are promising for long-term healing.
There's something about yoga, through the breathing, through the asanas, and through the approach that really creates an internal physical change in the body. It's good to go to treatment and talk, but if you try to preserve your yoga practice, it will be harder to recover out of this.
Our trauma, the stress we experience in our body, that we experience on the outside, leaves a signature in our bodies. Patience, consistency, and awareness of your emotional and physical. It requires patience, consistency, and awareness of your emotional and physical being. You can't ignore what you are feeling.
Listen, with that national issue that we have right now, there's no other national solution except touching the root. And I think this is really the only solution that we can give for the whole country to really heal.
Healing together. And that is a wrap for this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe. Thank you for watching.
You live in Israel or